Hello, and welcome to episode number 3 of the what is still known as the Figuring It Out as We Go Along show. I'm Dan Sapin from Long Island, New York, and I'm here with my trusty companions.
Martin Hallberg calling in from Stockholm, Sweden.
Joe Messina in Boston.
Damn, we're cosmopolitan. I can't stand it. And we're going to talk about some stuff today. My friend Martin here had an interesting idea for a show. We're going to tell stories and then talk about the stories.
I mean, something happened to me this week, and I just wanted to pop it into this show and see if we can figure something out around it. So I'll try to set the scene a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you can see the lights coming in through the windows here. It's approaching 8:15 in the evening in Sweden. We have a beautiful summer now ramping up. You know, the Scandinavian summer is quite something. And this weekend on Friday, we have a group of friends. We're six buddies, all in our 40s, early 40s, and we play badminton. I guess it's racquetball would be the American equivalent of. Or do you know badminton?
Oh,
yeah,
we have badminton.
We've got all kinds of mittens here. Yeah, we have badminton.
Yeah, it's a good sport. Let's put it that way. We have played for 10 years, and when every semester, every term, we have like a finale evening where we make a little tournament, and then we drink beer and we eat dinner together. So we had our game. We went down to the restaurant outside. It had burgers and beer. Beautiful evening. We walk along the water, which is right close to where I live here. And there are these small bridges that comes out from the walking path out into the water where people can come and swim. So these are like big public areas around the parks. It's a bunch of youth out there drinking. You have the high school people taking their graduation this week. So it's pumping. We go out on this bridge and start drinking our wine, having nice conversations. And then six people or 5 people, like 5 guys and 1 girl, they come running out on this bridge, and, you know, they're happy, they're drunk, and we're like, hey, hello. And they want to swim, obviously. So the two of the guys of this group of 5, they start getting undressed, they jump in, and they're kind of shooting the shit with us, talking a little bit of, you know, trash, but in a friendly way. So we're vibing with them. And then the girl takes off her clothes and jumps into the water. So they're all having a swim. The girl comes up. And then one of the 2 boys who first jumped in, he walks back in towards land from the bridge, and he pushes the girl into the water on a very ground or shallow, you know. And we're like, what the fuck? That's dangerous. You know, you can break your legs. I mean, there wasn't even water up to the waist. And she runs up to this dude and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? Are you out of your mind? So we're like, whoa, maybe these people don't know each other. There was actually 2 groups. So that group of 5 consisted of 2 dudes and then 1 group of 3, which was a girl and her 2 friends, like her boyfriend and a friend of his or something. So the girl is raging on this guy, and he's being quite smirked to her. You know, he's like, oh, do you think I should apologize for this? You said you wanted to swim. And he's like, you know, ramping her up. And then one of the 2 guys who came with the girl, he walks up to this fellow. And this is happening on the bridge we're on. So it's literally like 1 meter or 2 yards, you would say, I guess. It's a very small confined space. So one of the friends of the girl, he takes a bottle of white wine, like a full bottle. And he's like, you apologize to the girl. And he's like, fuck you. He's like, I'm going to smash this bottle of wine in your head. And we're all like, come on, guys, take it. You know, nobody's really paying attention. But then this guy, he's maybe 25, you know, like very thin, skinny. He doesn't look, he cracks the wine bottle across the face on this guy who is only in his boxer shorts. He just come up from swimming. And the whole bridge just kind of, you know, at least my perception of these things, like time just froze or something. There's blood streaming out. And one of my friends who's actually a medical doctor, he's like, takes the guy who'd been hit, start looking at him. I grab the guy who smashed him, and I just tell him, like, you stay right here. You know, you can fuck up 10 years of your life because he's continuing to like, because you pushed her. So and the guy who got hit tries to swing at the other guy. So me and my group of friends, luckily enough, we were, you know, calm enough to be able to help diffuse this. We called the cops, but the guy who smashed the bottle eventually ran away. So the cops came after. We gave a T-shirt to the guy who had been hit and so on. So, I mean, the story here that I want to bring is like how weird that sensation was. Like within 2 minutes, a beautiful evening, like it's a pitch perfect Swedish summer night, then turns into this. I mean, this is violence in its classical sense, pure violence. Like it's not a cocky street, like when, at least in my view, when you smack a full bottle of white wine across the face where there's like throat pulse, what do you call that, like pulsating veins. You have your eyes. I mean, you could injure a person significantly for life doing that. So there is some element of violence that is beyond, kind of, in my book at least, two people being cocky with one another. And it kind of jarred me and us. Like the whole night after this had diffused and the cops had been there, we were all quite shaky. None of us, I mean, we still had a nice time, but everything came down. We're like, maybe it's time to go home. It was around midnight. We all have kids, so it was time to go anyway. But the next day, when we were writing WhatsApp messages on our little thread, everybody commented on this session. It's something that got to us. We couldn't expel this episode from our own experiences of that evening, and it's something that becomes introjected. It's something that's scary, and it's delicate or evil, in the sense how quick and how easily one can end up in a completely uncontrollable world. Because that's how I felt. Like, there are things going on here that I have no fucking idea of why this is happening, who these people are, what is my role in this. So it's that kind of trauma response where within 2 minutes, your whole sensation of things is just like you're in Beirut or, whatever, like somewhere in a war zone, Iraq or something. So yeah, I guess this is my little story, and I would like to unpack this. Like, how do these things come about? How should one understand it? Because even though it's scary, it doesn't mean it's untrue. These things do happen. And I mean, on a shallow level, one could talk about, it's good to be able to know some martial arts or self-defense. But that's not what I'm after here. I'm after a more kind of metaphysical or existential discussion around this. Like, how should we conceive of our place in the world when within a couple of seconds you can find yourself in these kind of extremely weird situations that then will become part of your story until you can process them. And maybe if they're big traumas, they'll never fully leave you.
Yeah.
So I don't know what your thoughts are based on this little story, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that stands out for me is your use of the word trauma. Because if you think of what we mean by trauma doesn't have to be a situation in which the terrible thing happens to you, although something did happen to you here. Your reality got shaken by something. That may be the thing that makes an incident traumatic, is how it shakes your ability to stay there mentally, to be present for it without whatever part of us dissociates, whatever part of us numbs us or stops time or sort of makes us go cold in a situation. That is a trauma. And certainly going from one situation to the opposite, something so radically different, can do that. But it's also, these raw, wild, primitive things. You guys are having a perfect, beautiful evening, and all of a sudden you're faced with something that reminds you of just how shitty life can get all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Some people crack up in those situations. People go into shock, because they can't process it. So, but what stands out for you? You mentioned time, and you didn't know whether the sort of whoom was the bridge shaking or your own sense of reality shaking or something else.
Yeah. I mean, it's something like that. I'm not fully sure of how to explain it, but there is something of all of us who are there, and I think everybody would react in a similar way. We become extremely rational, extremely slow. I mean, I spoke to this guy who cracked the wine bottle in the other dude's face like I was a professional hostage negotiator or something. I mean, intuitively, I put both of my hands on his chest. I mean, he was like 25. He was not a a scary figure, and there was something in me that just told me like he knows he has passed the limit that he's going to regret. That was just my intuition. But I mean, those things I think are like bodily adaptations that goes like this, right? And you know, Thomas took the other guy, and my friend Ulle gave a t-shirt, and we were boom, boom, boom. We're like some kind of cops in there or something. And I think a lot of people have that reaction, right? When you're in a situation where things crack up, there is that response that feels, yeah, almost dissociated. I mean, it's like, it's not really me who's doing these things. It's some other kind of force that is just like, this needs to be done in this way. You guys listen to us. We're old men. We have children. Sit down, you know? And that's maybe some kind of trauma response or dissociation. I don't know, but it's like a very non-emotional, very efficient, very tight. Somehow. So kind of tightness to life there.
I'm sorry, Joe, let me just jump in here. There's one more thing. We talk about trauma, dissociation, but the thing I heard was that as much as this just shook you up, unless you're someone who deals with this kind of thing on a regular basis, this just knocks you right out of your normal, not even your normal mental state. It's like, I think the thing that makes it feel like dissociation is that it brings up a different Martin. It brings up it reshuffles the deck suddenly, and then there's all these different things being asked of you. But yet, not only you sized this guy up and did this sort of controlling but containing thing, the hands on the chest, the wise words, the sort of wise, but now's the moment, stop this right here. But everybody took on a role. Somebody got the shirt, somebody else attended to the injured, as if
it's weird, actually.
No matter how alien this was, you all fell into a position without having to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's and in that way one can also, I mean, one can flip this in different ways, but it's like you pull out the rug or the floor underneath, but all of a sudden, I mean, the human is a weird animal. Like, you adapt so quickly, and it's almost like there is some kind of response within people to do these things, right? Like, you hear about people who do these extraordinary feats, right? Like a tree falls over a parent or something, and child can lift it up, or, you know, like in moments of crisis, there is something that pops out that's just like, what the hell is this? How? I mean, fair enough. A few of us have been through a little bit in life, so it's maybe some experience comes also, but I think it's more of a generic kind of quality that any person does when shit gets this difficult. I think one does it to be able to control for my own sake. Like, I think talking to that guy was my way of trying to calm this down so that I could be there in a way, you know? But it makes me think of, I don't know if you have seen, there's a good Netflix documentary called Fightworld, where a guy goes to different countries and studies martial arts. And then he goes to Cameroon, Cambodia, Thailand, Mexico. He talks to the trainers of Alvarez and some of these great fighters. But then he goes to Israel, and he's to investigate Krav Maga. And I mean, that's something else, dude. Like, because all these other sports, he's been talking about, like fighting in a cage, you know, techniques, skills. And then he goes to Israel and interviews these guys, and they're like, these are methods of how to kill other human beings, basically. This is not a martial art. Like, when he goes to Israel, he gets flipped. Like, his whole conception of his documentary series gets flipped, because they're not talking about like how to throw a cross or, you know, how to roll the punch. They're like, if you have a knife, you break his arm this way. And if he has a gun, rolling up your window and locking the door, that's Krav Maga, you know? And it's like, to take a detour around the guy who holds the bottle, that would be Krav Maga. So it's like a completely different conception, because there's not fighting. It's like life in a way. And of course, this comes with their history and their territory being, you know, constrained geopolitically. And it's also a very small country, right? Mm-hmm. So every time you walk out the door, you have a collective of different religious identities and different cultural expressions that needs to coexist. So there's more pressure maybe in Israel historically and geopolitically than in other countries. So the people living there maybe have adapted to this. But it's a similar metaphor that I want to use here, because two guys pushing each other could be more like boxing. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, they're sizing each other up. They're going to have a fight, maybe there'll be a couple of punches.
The old joke, like, hold me back. It's like, somebody please hold me back. I can't, I don't know what I'm going to do next.
But that's like boxing. But then this Krav Maga is the guy cracks the bottle. It's like, it's not fighting anymore. Dude, you can kill a guy. So yeah, it was just something that I don't know if you know anything about this Krav Maga. I have never encountered it before.
Oh yeah,
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I've heard of Krav Maga. But what this made me think of is, I guess, well, when something like that happens, and like I, thankfully don't have a lot of experience with violent situations like that. But it reminds me of like a death of a family member or something like that, where you have things that you do automatically in the moment, and then the experience of trauma is sort of like the aftermath, where you're trying to get used to the idea that like you are a person who this has happened to now.
One of those "this is me" moments, if you know what I mean. This is me right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like it's I think you might have said something like this before, Martin, but like it's you're witnessing your reality change. And it's hard to get used to, I guess.
Yeah, the shift of reality. Something that came up here, Martin, was that we may not know we're doing this ever until something shakes us enough that we realize that the difference between, like you say, the shoving. There are these rituals, okay? And I mean, if we've watched, nature shows, or, there've been plenty of scenes in comedies that deal with this, where, there's the display, the fear threat display. I'm going to make myself look bigger and tougher. I'm going to use a lot of big words. I'm going to shove you. I'm going to make sure you can see my bulging muscles, so that maybe you won't hurt me. You'll think I'm dangerous. But every so often, you have a situation that does not fit a category. This is not a ritual. This is not buying time to figure out what to do next. You have a situation when you call it real with a capital R. It takes you out of any possible comfort zone. It gives you something raw. And your nervous system, whatever preparation you've had from life that you may or may not know you've had, suddenly forces you. One of the things that's traumatic about situations like this is that you will often find out who you are when you don't have, there's nothing recognizable happening, when you don't have a script, when you're not sure, there's no cops, people like, you can't take the law into your own hands. Well, actually, we take the law into our own hands all the time, because the cops aren't there all the time. There are a million situations, most of them are not this urgent, a million situations in which we have to improvise, and we don't know what the parameters are. We're trying to figure out what they are while that adrenaline is pouring and pumping, and and time has either slowed down or speeded up. But there's something else that, don't let me forget this now. This was a good one. Something about how, Krav Maga. I've had a few Israeli friends, a few Israeli classmates. Actually, I was raised in a very Zionist family, and I'm staying away from politics as much as I can in terms of, Palestine, Israel. I just don't want to go there now. But one thing that I was raised understanding is that Israel was a tiny place, the size of a relatively small state in the United States. And it is surrounded by countries, all of whom don't just want to beat it, they want Israel to never exist again, to never have existed. And so you have people who all serve in the army, all serve in the armed forces, no matter what their background and preparation is. These are people who live every day with a greatly enhanced awareness that something can explode at any moment. Whatever assumptions the three of us have about how, yeah, shit happens, but it's probably not happening to us. It has happened again and
sure.
again and again. And the assumption is if we're not prepared to respond, we're just going to die, period. And it's going to be close to home. Now, Krav Maga is one of many really good sort of save your ass arts. But a couple things came to mind. One is in our first year of graduate school, it was our dean of the department at the time who had a terrible trauma. He was closing up his office. He's a psychoanalyst. He's a PhD. He's not an MD. He doesn't have a prescription pad. A couple of thugs bust into his office and demand pills and demand that he write them a script or give them whatever he has. He's trying to tell them, I'm not that kind of doctor. They don't believe it. They don't want to believe it. And they beat him half to death. And that was he was badly physically and psychologically injured from this. And when he got a little better, he started studying with the master of a couple of Filipino arts. Spencer G was his guru's name, who taught him an art called Pananandata, which is like Kali. That's the Filipino Krav Maga. And then he brought Spencer to teach an early morning seminar to anyone who wanted to join. This was our first year of grad school. I was working in a clinic in a particularly dangerous neighborhood. And a lot of us, just even, Bob, the professor, had been telling us one day, most of you are going to encounter some violence I'm a psychologist, by the way, you're going to be in a hospital on a locked ward or something. And in fact, I have the majority of my friends who have worked in mental hospitals have been punched, some of them from behind. They've been hit, chairs thrown at them. The point of the little class, this informal class, was that Spencer, the Pananandata expert, was going to teach us how to defend yourself against a violent patient without killing them, using whatever you have around you, a chair, a clipboard, a coffee mug. Where are you in the room? Where's the door? Is there a table in between? How are you going to survive? Maybe restrain this person, but not harm them unless it's unavoidable. And part of what we were learning was that in this business, mental health, even we have our assumptions. We've got a lot of assumptions. If you talk about it, it gets better. Let's be reasonable. Share your feelings, empathize. That works a lot of the time. But that's one of those rituals with all these assumptions that if we do these things, everything will be fine. You'll get insight, there will be character change. No, there are a lot of people who are not interested in character change. They want to fucking kill you. They might not even know you are you. You're just a reflection of what's going on in their fevered mind at that moment. But what you do in the next 5 seconds, 2 seconds, is going to determine whether you live, whether your child has a father, whether you're crippled for the rest of your life. And that's real. And what we're talking about here is real with a capital R. How do we respond?
I mean, I have a few. Maybe I'll do my little few jabs that are kind of unsorted and see where it goes. And I mean, just one what do you call it? Passage or passage. I thought the whole time that the guy with the wine bottle was going to push the other guy into the water. That's what because he was standing there in his boxers, like 1 meter from the, he just came up from the water, right? So I thought like that would be the perfect humiliating move, to just push him back into the water, but that didn't happen. Anyhow, what I thought about just listening to you guys here, I have like one idea that came up was what we talked about last episode when we talked about boxing, because we talked about that there's adversary that pulls people. Like the greatest boxers are rarely rich middle class kids. I mean, there are a few, but the real great ones usually come from real tough adversarial conditions, right? That's something you brought up last. So that made me think of that somehow, like how much of this real is actually a constitutive force of what could be understood as reality, right? Like
unbuffered, no bubble wrap around you and life.
Yeah, exactly. How much of that could be understood as good in some, in some Darwinian or evolutionary or adaptive view of life, right? Like, is it necessary? Like, is this kind of violence a streak of life that we need to understand within ourselves and within others in order to get a full understanding, approaching a fuller, more integrated, nuanced understanding of reality. So that was one thought. Another thought I had was that I wanted to go a little bit with what Joe said there about, you go through something. I don't think that maybe this episode is that for me, but I have definitely had my share of those things. And you come out on the other end, and like you said, Joe, you're not the same person anymore. Like, you have to relate to the fact that you are this, whatever it is. You now are the person with a deceased relative, or
right.
You are the person with chronic pain in your lower back, or whatever it could be. So that was another thought that I thought interesting to explore. And then the third one, when we talk about the real, I just start thinking of Lacan, of course.
Who doesn't?
And I can't say, who doesn't? And there, I guess, what's the difference between the Lacanian real and, let's say, the O of beyond, right? Like that affinity, like that infinite potential. I mean, beyond's O to me is more romantic and more pleasant to think of. For me, I associate Lacanian real with more, let's say, horror or trauma.
Yeah.
Or
let's define these terms a little bit, though, because these are, I think these are important, and what they mean is important, and the distinctions are important. Say, you're a lot fresher with Lacan than I am. Say more about why we have this concept of the real with the capital R.
Ooh, man, you're putting me on the spot now. I don't think I can.
We can edit it out if it sucks.
Yeah. That's a good. What do
Can
you
we
call
edit
it?
that out, by the way?
That's a shelf holder, a placeholder. No, but I mean, for me, I know that the real are one of Lacan's three, right? You have the imaginary, you have the real, and the symbolic. Those are the three, let's say, strands of life. And Lacan says that the subject is constituted through an instantaneous mingling of these three dimensions. So the real would then be that which can never fully be represented. It's those primordial affective core kind of sensations of being a subject in the world that could also be pre-language, before memory, like we talked about last episode. So there is something of the real that is untouchable. He says this somewhere, Lacan.
I got Wikipedia up.
Yeah, le réel c'est l'impossible. He says that somewhere, that the real is always untouchable in some dimension. But then it is married with the imaginary, which is the dyadic phase between the child and the mother, basically where images take a central role in how the psyche functions. And then the third register is the symbolic, which is linked to language, right? So the way that these three elements, let's say the non-linguistical, primordial, affective core, the imaginary, fantasy-based realm, and then the linguistic, structural, that's linked to, let's say, society and principles and history and human narrative and so on. Where these three meet, that's where the subject has his or her subjectivity, basically. So the real in this aspect would be something that is impossible to grasp and contains a certain element of horror often.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my preconception. And once again, I don't know Lacan enough to say that this is true, but my understanding through Zizek is that there is definitely some element of horror in the Lacanian real.
Yeah.
It's something that's taunting you in a way.
Joe, questions? Because I know part of your value here is that you've not been loaded down with these concepts, but you're at least as smart as we are, and you can tell when things are, I don't know, bullshit or need to be clarified.
Yeah, no, I think I think this is coming across pretty clearly. But what can we add to tie it together? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like this could relate to like almost anything.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, Dan, can you tell us like what's happening in our brains when we're in this moment of like automatic leaping to action versus mulling it over 1,000 times afterwards?
Okay, well, the basics here, without having to get too much into the neurology and the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex and the capacity for mirroring, and what breaks down, it's fight flight.
Right.
And fight flight is an important concept for humans because our health, to some respect, our ability to function socially and to hold it together without falling apart. What was it that Christopher Bollas book? Was it something about going to pieces without falling apart, or falling apart without going to pieces? Fight flight is something that takes us out of, well, all of these things. Actually, the two items, the imaginary and the symbolic. Fight flight, you freeze, you run, you attack and kill. Now I've got my lovable semi-wild dog over here who's looking very tame on the carpet, but I often think one of the great things about our relationship, because we really kind of get each other, I think we get each other, he might say otherwise, is that although he can love and he knows how to communicate with us a little bit, he is in the moment. And if he sees a dog in the neighborhood and he doesn't like that dog, he's ready to tear his throat out. He will barrel through the front door. There's no discussion. There is no posturing. If somebody is coming at us wearing a hoodie, he hates people wearing hoodies, he will lunge. And there's, it's lunge first and don't ask questions later. But at the same time, when he loves you, he loves you. There's no embarrassment. Now, what does this mean on the human level? Well, there's no buffer zone. There's no, hey, let's talk about this. There's no shoving and pushing. There's no use of polite language to try to avoid a conflict. Like, I think you're an asshole. I don't trust you. I think you may want to hurt me. But I'll say, hey, sir, how you doing? Can I help you? As opposed to, holding my shotgun on him and say, state your purpose. You got 3 seconds. And even that 3 seconds is a buffer zone. My dog doesn't give anybody 3 seconds. It doesn't occur to him. Now, in that fight or flight moment, a human being can either flee, fight, or freeze, or they can find something three-dimensional, something that enables them to still communicate, something that, if the situation allows it, I can still, to some degree, think about how this situation can be salvaged without anything horrible and traumatic happening, or something less traumatic. Now, I'm looking up on Wikipedia here on the real from Lacan. The real is that which is authentic, unchangeable. It may be considered primordial. It's external, infinite, absolute, noumenal. Like Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, speaks of the phenomenon, which is reality as it is filtered through the senses, and the noumenon, which is the thing in itself, whatever it is, separate from our ability to apprehend it. And most folks don't bother thinking about just how much signal processing goes on with every experience. It can be easily demonstrated that we have no accurate memories, none whatsoever. That every experience is filtered through, number one, a very limited channel of our senses. It is screened for relevant and irrelevant. It is then correlated with familiar things, if there are any, so that we are not reprocessing or processing something newly that we don't have any precedent for. And by the time we remember it, we're already using it to rewrite past memories. So in this situation, we are already inclined to interpret the hell out of what's happening, or to try to. Are you friend or enemy? Can I say something to you? Can I disappear? Can I say I want my mommy? You know, which is imaginary right there. That is the imaginary and the symbolic. All right. The real here is challenging you to respond to the facts, not based on your comfort, not based on what's normal for you. And so what can we do as humans? When we're faced with a situation that is all fight or flight, that is just raw, real, get real. You know, think of you know, when people talk about, you know, getting real or keeping it real or being down to earth, it means less bullshit, right? And the extreme version of that is the imaginary is, I don't like this situation. I, or something in me, is going to pretend it's something else. So this isn't happening to me. Or it's happening, but it kind of sucks, but it's not as bad as I think it is. And please, somebody hug me. And then there's the symbolic.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
And the symbolic is the basis of all human communication. We find words that are agreed upon in terms of what they mean, more or less. There are acts that we can perform that help others engage or stay away from us or empathize with us. But all of these things are separate from the event that is happening. And when we are shaken up enough by this fight-flight reaction, this pure instinctive reaction, we can't imagine, or we imagine so much that we go away. You know, we're not home. You think of how in that moment, did time seem infinite? You know, did time suddenly collapse? Did it freeze? And
there was no time.
And we don't know what to say. You know, so in a way, our struggle is to stay three-dimensional so we can still move. So this sucks. This is horrible. I wish it wasn't happening, but I'm dealing with it.
Yeah. But that's what I want to do, because I think it's a neat, I mean, something is coming together for me in terms of Joe's previous comment of, you know, you've suffered through something and it is, you know, you're slightly a different person afterwards, right? You have to carry that experience of being changed in some way. So my idea here would be then, which I think based on my experience at least actually makes sense, that one updates the symbolic and the imaginary field based on the experiences from the real. I mean, I think that's what people, you know, when you go to trauma therapy, right, there's a very often a narrative element, you know, write your story, tell your story, expose yourself to telling the story to strangers.
Rewrite your memories.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea there is to link up to new language, right? So let's say one has suffered let's say my cat died or whatever. Okay, so now I am a person that has a cat that is dead. But what can I do? I can start finding new languages. Maybe there's other guys out there with a dead cat. I can chat to them. How did they relate with this? You know, you go to different groups or whatever, and you start talking. So you get new images, new dream work. You get an updated imaginary filter, and also ideally an updated symbolic filter. So yeah, you are actually not the same person. I mean, Vladimir Klitschko 2.0, he's a different than 1.0. So he fights in a different style. He uses different elements within his body and his skill set than he did before. I mean, he's still a boxer, but he boxes in a complete. So I think that whole struggle of how to get back into a coherent set of these three realms, the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic, that's when I guess that subject would feel healed in a way, you know, like, yeah, my cat is still dead, but my life is now put together again. And depending on the severity of the trauma and the frequency of trauma, I guess, and the nature of trauma, that could be more or less challenging. I mean, think about people living in extreme poverty and war and stuff. I mean, their life, their blueprint is trauma. The idea to update this, to come back into the default zone of security and comfort, I think it's something, to talk less bullshit, one has to be very frank that for a lot of millions of people, that doesn't exist. There is no blueprint to deviate from.
There is no comfort zone, and there will not be.
No,
one.
I mean, you grew up in Aleppo or, you know, whatever. Like, there is no Rosetta Stone that you then depart from, and then you want to get back into a coherent view of the world. Like, for some people, this is grinding from day one, right? And I guess the people who commit a lot of these things, they also have, maybe, in this case, clearly not. I mean, this was a well-off Swedish guy in the richest part of Stockholm. But, you know, for a lot of people, this is life. This is Krav Maga. You know, this is how life looks. So those were my reflections there, that there is something, a possibility of updating the imaginary and the symbolic discourses based on experiences in the real. And that is a struggle. That is a work.
Yeah.
That is a healing work, one could say, maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think a lot about how perception shapes reality for us, because there's a certain limit to how much we can know the real. Like, I always think about this example where there's not that much water in here, but like when you have like a straw in water, there's that weird like distortion where the straw under the water looks like offset from the exposed straw, and that's apparently something that certain animals, like certain birds, don't actually have. That, like, they see something underwater for what it is because they are, you know, evolved to hunt fish or whatever. And it's like, well, if we can't even, you know, all see the same fish under the water, and, you know, and agree on like what spot it's in, then you know, it's hard to, like, how knowable is reality. If we could actually see some rendering of reality, you know, separate from human perception, would it be recognizable at all?
Did you ever see, they have examples of what a flower looks like to a bee? You know, and so you see a perfectly, and we could look this up, I don't know, provide a little bibliography here, but it's very cool. You take an ordinary dull whitish flower, but you see it in, I mean, we see a tiny little sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. Most of it is meaningless to us. You know, go just a little bit to the left into the ultraviolet, it burns you. Light no longer communicates, it literally burns your flesh. Yeah. But that insect sees in that plain white flower an elaborate landing strip, colors that we do not have names for, but when we sort of filter it back into the visible spectrum, we see these remarkable patterns, all of which are basically like the landing strips at Kennedy Airport with the signs and all of them telling the insect, food down here. No, make a left. Yeah. But that's what's relevant to a honeybee. And the situation here we're talking about is not just you know, what does our sense apparatus allow us to pick up on, but how much of the hard part of reality, the stuff that challenges and threatens us, are we capable of taking in? And there's taking in, and then there's, can we respond to it? So I think one of the beauties in the situation that you were telling us about today, Martin, was that it was scary, it was ugly, there was something a little unthinkable. I mean, this guy, obviously, this is somebody who would, you know, your description of this probably relatively well-off, skinny, unimposing 25-year-old who went straight from don't bother our friend, this girl who gets pushed in the water, to a potentially murderous gesture with nothing in between except the demand for an apology. He's basically saying, join me in the symbolic order or I will murder you.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what he's saying.
He could not handle the situation. He could not perceive enough to dissuade him from doing something that would have likely irrevocably altered the lives of his life and the victim and everybody who saw it happen. And yet you and your friends, something in each of you was activated. Your ego didn't choose, or rather the part of you that thinks of itself didn't say, all right, we're going to delegate now. You're a doctor, take care of him. Me, I'll do the hostage negotiation. No, whatever it was in you that maybe hadn't been used before or not in a long time, immediately sort of self-delegated.
Yeah, it's true, actually, that it's very much happened like that. And I think what's interesting, I don't know, in terms of the real and this more horrifying elements of it, is that it's somatic, at least for me. When I think of talk to you guys about these things, I think body, I think reactions, muscles, fibers, tenders, like there is that autopilot quality. And it was also interesting that I put both of my hands on this guy's chest, you know, like it's a daring move in one way, but to me it felt completely natural. And also like, maybe that's the only way in, you know. I think of trauma therapy. I've done a bit of it myself, you know, and there's different strands of trauma therapy, but there's definitely one big that relates to somatic experiencing and working with your body, using your body, because there is no representation, there is no language. The images are fucked up, you know, from distortions. So your body holds this memory. There's a very famous book called Your Body Keeps the Score, by an author called Bassel Van Der Kolk. Yeah,
You said it better.
This is a very famous book, and it's an interesting backstory because that was also at one point it was a challenger to be part of the diagnostic manual. There was something called developmental trauma, so it was a suggested diagnosis for people who have suffered repetitive problems in their life, but it cannot be accrued to one big car crash, or, you know, like PTSD is often associated with, you know, single episodes of severe trauma. I mean, Dan could speak to this a lot more than me, but this developmental trauma approach of Levine, it was different. It was basically saying if you grow up in an environment where there's repetitive distortions to you in one way or another, you can be fucked up as a result. So this guy, Peter Levine and Bassel Van Der Kolk, they suggested that this should be incorporated into the DSM manual, and it was a kind of political battle there. But I think it came in and then it came out. I don't think it's there now. But anyhow, that was just my thinking here, that the body plays a crucial role when we talk about these things. There is an entry port into people. There is a potential within an individual to work with the body to get better when things get stuck in the mental apparatus. And I guess, you know, boxing and training and all these things is one way. And there's also yoga and massage and breath work and, you know, gentle tactile touching and all kinds of stuff.
You're onto something, a number of important things here. One that I think is worth thinking about is what does it mean that certain experiences are handled, processed outside of the mind, or rather in the body part of the mind. You know, Van Der Kolk and Peter Levine, you know, that they're part of a growing axis of neuroscientists and neuropsychologists who are paying attention to the vasovagal system, that part of our nervous system, which is, built around the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body. It runs from about here straight through to the exit door of the digestive system. And, for people.
Have you seen a picture of it? Have you Joe, have you seen a picture? You can Google the vagus nerve or the vagal nerve, maybe in English, is it?
I've heard Vegas,
Vegas or vagal?
Well, it's the vagus nerve, but the vagal system.
Okay.
It's huge, huh? Like you said, Dan. It's like a web that just runs through.
Yeah.
Anyhow, go ahead. Yeah, that's the vagus nerve has to do also with sound, right? The vibrations of like like yoga.
Yeah, one of the reasons why why certain tones do something positive for us. But it was interesting that I'd always sort of known this in an academic way, but my friend Rachel, who will join us one day, was the one who really made me think about what some people refer to as the enteric nervous system, which is that sort of archaic outpost of our nervous system, which dates back to some of the very beginnings of multicellular life on Earth. That long before we had a mind that was capable of processing anything in a way we would call mental, we had this original sort of the big wire, the big cable that runs down the middle, and that a lot of the stuff that we can't mentalize is handled in the body. And, there are examples of this, the way we feel sick to our stomach when we're really stressed, or, we get IBS, we're constipated, or the other version, when we're under a great deal of stress, how even our body starts to get more inflammation and our immune system gets low when we've had too many painful experiences. But one of the things this means is that the capacity to process things mentally, to be symbolic, to think things over and decide what to do, to come up with a repertoire of techniques and skills and reactions. That's stuff that was added 2 seconds ago in terms of the time scale of life. And so when we say butterflies in the stomach, or I want to throw up when I see that, or things like that, we are using language that points to the fact that the part of our body, the part of our mind that handles emotions that we don't know what to do with, is in our belly. It is elsewhere than up here. And it's not a coincidence that this involves things that are more animalistic in nature, that are more inhuman. Now, there's one axis of it. There's the neural aspect of it, the bodily, the psychosomatic. Then there's big ideas like the stuff we get from Lacan and beyond. You mentioned all right. So we have these really heavy symbolic representations, which they're representations of things that most of us could relate to without all of the intellectual baggage. There's a reason why these guys came up with these ideas. The real is that stuff that falls outside of what the human specialties are. Thinking about things, delaying things, finding alternatives to doing instinctual things that would get us in trouble. So we talk about it, or we imagine, wishful thinking. And then there is Bion's O, which is the bigger reality we sort of have to just swim through. And a little bit at a time, we get to process it. And if we are processing it, our mind gets better. We grow more capacities. We become more self-aware, better able to adapt. Basically, that more and more of the hard stuff becomes manageable psychologically. And again, it's no coincidence that so much of that stuff is bodily. When Bion talks about the emotional response to encountering things in O, the unknown, things that exceed our skills, our capacities to deal. Mm-hmm. Our response to that is what he calls catastrophic dread. That is the pure fight-flight emotion that I'm now encountering something for which I have absolutely no template. And my psyche soma is telling me, you're about to die. You're about to dissolve. And the feeling is dread. But only through that dread, through coming through it, do we realize that we can survive, that our mind can grow, that we can handle things better. And examples like the one you gave, this particular story, and the way you and your friends responded, as well as the way the guy with the bottle failed to respond, tell you that most of this stuff happens outside of consciousness. You didn't plan to do those things. Something in each of you did them.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is this phrase that popped up, like flowing with the real, or gliding with O, or, you know, is there an idea to explore there? That is it possible to think of a way of living? I mean, I'm thinking of these Buddhists, you know, and like the people who meditate a lot and stuff, also, that they can recount, you know, stories of how they feel they carry this back platter of an ineffable mystic sense of calm with them everywhere they go, right? So they've meditated so much that kind of consciousness, or people who refer to themselves as awake or awoke, or, you know, whatever to make of this these days. But my thinking here was a little bit in line with what you said, Dan. I mean, it was a beautiful passage. I think you recounted this in a nice way and I can't like back up on it. What I mean is like the role of the body, the links to historical kind of evolution, where the neocortex is, like you said, 3 seconds of that story. So we carry some kind of register that has been there with us the whole time. And the more we get used to leaning in, trusting, sensing, but also continuing to find representations as our mind enlarges, as our capacity to represent widens, there's also a kind of duty in a way, I think, to try to do justice to that capacity, whether it is to writing or doing music or doing comedy or shows or whatever is your medium. But that whole dialectic of enduring encounters with the real and being better at representing them represents some kind of wholeness and integration project. And that's what I try to capture with like flowing with the real, or gliding with O, or something, as a possible way to look at a mature integrated life in a way.
Yeah. So what I was just thinking about is this app that I used, sort of a self-therapy app.
Which
that
one?
I used to it's called Curable.
Oh yeah.
I think, we might have talked about this. It's very much based on the work of John Sarno, who was all about this idea of thoughts getting stuck and like your body, expressing them in physical ways. And that's, it's the best theory I've heard for why fibromyalgia happens, at least, because like no one else has an answer to that, really. And it did have a tremendous effect. So yeah, I that's what it reminded me of. And it also reminded me of, I had, growing up and until recently, and sometimes still, I've I had issues with, not being able to control my anger very well. And I never smashed a full wine bottle over anyone's head, but
So you would pour it out gently and say,
right,
half a bottle, less lethal.
yeah,
And always Chardonnay.
right. And that was something, I was just a yeller, basically. And it ties into this, idea of perceiving the world that we were talking about, that like I would get, insanely frustrated and angry about these things. And people I was close to would say, that it's not normal to react that way, and it's not, you know, what's the word? Proportional to the
Yeah.
yeah, it's not
One of my least
proportional or
favorite
appropriate
words.
to the to the situation, and yeah, it's one of those automatic responses that it it just I don't know. I don't like I think the therapist I was seeing several years ago helped me a lot with it. But it's hard to say like really what changed it. It's just this like sort of ongoing process of remaking how you perceive the world.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question then, Joe. With
Cool.
the benefit of a few years, some therapy, some thinking, some growing up, I guess, the fact that I think we still believe that the this area of the prefrontal cortex having to do with executive functions, planning, following through, self-control, doesn't really finish, the wiring doesn't finish until you're 26, 27, even 30 years old. So adolescence, basically we're still neurologically kids until we're about 30.
Well, in
I have
that
to go
case,
back and see if we
ju-
still believe it. But what do you think the yelling expressed? I mean, what function did it serve? Why
Well,
yelling instead of something else?
yeah. Well, I think it was in large. Well, first of all, yeah. If it takes until 30, I'm barely out of that. I'm just barely over that threshold. But yeah, I think it was just a frustration because it was, there was always something that set me off, but I think it was always like a culmination of the mass, a conglomeration of my frustrations with life. Like, I'm a person who was always like hyper aware of things that didn't seem right, and I, go through every day, sort of like making an unconscious list of those things, and then some perceived injustice would happen, and I'm like, that you don't get to get away with that, and it was this sort of expression of the frustration. And what's really annoying is that it's not. I don't know if yelling really made me feel better. Like I again would think that like it was some way of like letting out all of those frustrations, but it didn't really. And so like getting that angry does something to your body as well, and that, like then I'm all like charged up and not feeling good. And then now when I know not to do that most of the time, I don't, and then I still don't feel great because I'm like just holding in like when I want to scream. I have one of my boss at one of my jobs is not the best guy, I'm finding, and I had a situation recently where apparently for the past 2 years he had put the wrong social security number on my my W-2, and
Oops.
yeah, I don't know where, like it might have just been his accountant and he didn't even like see that happen, and then I didn't catch it and my accountant didn't catch it, so like it's partially on me for having just signed the wrong thing, but so he had done that, and then I've been on unemployment for the past year, for being partially unemployed, and several weeks ago they informed me that there was an issue with getting me my payments because of this Social Security problem. So I told him about it, and it 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by, and I don't hear an update from him, and so I ended up calling him and asking for an update, and he said, "Oh, I'll try to contact my accountant today." And it was like, okay, so nothing's happened yet. And unemployment's gonna like they say that I owe them money back now because I've received money based on income I got from this employer that I'm technically not employed with because it's not my social security number. So they're like, "Oh, you owe this money back." So I told them, like, I'm gonna have to like pay them $2,000 if you don't do this. And like I told you about this several weeks ago, and he started yelling at me. Basically, he just started like unhinged, just screaming over the phone, like, this is, it's not my fault. Like, you signed off on the thing, and like, when the conversation I was having had nothing to do with blame. It was just sort of like, this has to happen, and you're the one who can make it happen. So please do it. But so he starts screaming at me, and I just hung up on him. Like, and this is something that in the past I might have yelled back, or I would have hung up the phone and then immediately emailed and said, "Hey, I quit." But instead, I did nothing, which I think is is the right thing to do. And I felt awful for a week or two. I had just some of the worst anxiety of the past few years, and just felt terrible.
And knowing what you need and what you definitely don't need, what was the real source of the anxiety there? Because you mentioned a few things. One is that you hung up without yelling. You hung up without the immediate email follow-up. What do you think the fire that fueled that fueled that anxiety was?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is like just the tax situation, and it's like, well, is this going to get worked out? And I think part of it is also just that sort of this inner like injustice clock that I feel like I've always had, where it was like, this guy's not getting what's coming to him. Like, no one has told him off. I haven't, I haven't really said anything to him. He's not gonna like face any consequence, and all I can do is just like sit here and wait.
Has the issue been fixed now, Joe? This was a couple of weeks ago, you said. Has he fixed this now? Because the way you recount the story, it sounds like he needs to fix this, right?
Yeah. So what happened was, he ended up saying, "Hey, like, so pay for half of like the accountant fee or something, because like technically it is on me too."
What
so
the fuck?
yeah, but he was like, "Yeah, you got to pay for half of this," and it was, my reaction to that is like, well, again, you've known about this for a long time, and if that was your issue, was that you felt that this was partially my fault, which is true, and you wanted me to pay for half of it, well, you should have said that instead of just not.
But I mean, the reason I was asking was also because there's different dimensions to this, right? I mean, anger and rage, I mean, one can talk about them as biological drives, also serving purposes. And in this latter part of the story that we talk about now, there is a role for some kind of mature, directed anger, right? I mean, the guy has fucked you. He has not followed through on his responsibility. You can get in trouble. You can get in serious trouble that also has financial consequences.
Right.
So in a kind of mature manner, it is appropriate and adaptive to be, I need to follow through, right? To be assertive, perhaps, rather than angry, but to be strong. Like, this needs to be taken care of. So that's why I was asking, did the issue come through? Because in that aspect, anger is appropriate. At least that's how I feel after hearing your story.
Yeah.
Like the guy he's not supposed to be able to do this. But then there is the first half of the story where you also talk about this in terms of your earlier life and so on. And I mean, I can relate to this on many levels, and it's different for everybody, I guess. But there's sometimes delicate interplays between, you know, one emotion can cover other emotions. And sometimes anger can be combined with helplessness or a feeling of lack of resource, right? I mean, power is intricate, I think, in these discussions. Whether we talk about a family or we talk about an employment situation, you know, the child has less power than its parents or siblings if they're older, and an employee has less power than the boss of the employee. So this kind of symbolic access, or who gets to dictate what is appropriate behavior, or, you know, the parent might say, don't do this because it's not what you're supposed to do. There's a unmistakable power element infused in this. And, you know, helplessness can be a very powerful feeling. I mean, it's that dread in a way that Dan spoke about earlier, the catastrophic dread. It could also be linked to the feeling of, you know, very early years in one's life, if there are things lacking. We talked about this in some episode, right? Like the mother is usually the primary caregiver. You know, there could be food, nutrition, but there could be emotional support, emotional security, all kinds of things that we help our children with. I mean, my son is 18 months now, so it's on my mind all the time how extremely dependent and vulnerable they are. I mean, he can't do anything by himself. So we all come from that story. Each and every one of us have been like small burping little ducks, you know, like Winnicott says, there is no such thing as a child without his mother.
There's
like
no such thing as a baby.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a baby. There's only a baby and its caregiver. I mean, a baby is a pure vulnerable, the most vulnerable mammal of all. So that sense of helplessness that we all have, more or less repressed, can be activated in different situations. And anger can be one way. I mean, these are more my own reflections of my life, and I don't know if they're applicable to your situation, Joe, but helplessness can be a very difficult situation to deal with. And if, for example, you think that this injustice that you had witnessed matters to you, and your surroundings don't acknowledge that, that kind of becomes a receipt of a way, of a helpless position. Look, right. I have seen this. This matters to me. Listen to me. And the environment says, well, this is not important. You should behave in a different way. You know, this is a little bit how I interpret your story. It's not meant to explain what is and what is not. I'm just relaying to you how I heard your story. So it's easy for me to feel empathic with the way I hear your story, that if things that matters to me, I tell them to people that are close to me, and they say, this doesn't matter to me, that can click with that helplessness that I have experienced in life. And anger has been one way of trying to say this to people, because I don't know it myself. So I don't know how the fuck should I explain all these colliding emotions. I'll just scream, right? Because that gives a sense of relief. But as you say, it's not, one doesn't feel as relieved afterwards, maybe.
Well, think of what the scream is and the helplessness is. I'm thinking just in terms of the Lacan we started with. You got a failure on at least two levels here. You got the real. The real is, here's what happened. All right. And then we attempt to address the real, but also our feelings, our personal needs, first through the imaginary. You know, we there's a part of us that wants either justice, or we imagine help. We imagine how something is going to go. And then we attempt, and you see the reaction of the person in authority, the person with power. The person with power, faced with a real that he didn't like, had a tantrum. The tantrum was a failure of the symbolic order. Now, that's his thing. Looking at you, Joe, I'm thinking, well, different families. It was a patient of mine who we got a lot of mileage out of learning that the message growing up in his house, and this is a man in his 60s now, was he who gets angry loses. And we generalized that to he who expresses any reaction loses. which of course was used as a way of controlling the children in the house, because the child's reaction invariably reflects, well, let's see, if the child is angry because he didn't get A, B, and C, there's a good chance that means that I screwed up as a parent. And so I'm not going to tell you to shut up because you're wrong. I'm going to tell you to shut up because you just made me feel guilty. But I'm not going to let you know that. So I'm just going to tell you it's your fault. Even if I have no way of convincing you it's your fault, I'll just drill it into you. And
spot on.
Yeah. And think about it. For me, I mean, I got this giant wave of angry empathy for you, Joe. I immediately started thinking, well, all right, Uncle Dan wants to fix the situation. Because you're not 14 years old. It just this is my primal reaction to my kin getting fucked with. And I'm thinking, on the one hand, I really want to teach this guy that it's a good idea to be nicer to people. And I want to do so in a way that illustrates how not nice I can be. That's my imaginary. And then there's the breakdown of the symbolic order, which is the despair. And I get this when there is no point to communication, because at least one party has no inclination to build a symbolic bridge. All he wants to do is yell and scream. And that's the boss.
Right.
That brings up a feeling of angry, helpless despair in me. Yeah. I could say what I need to say. It ain't going to get me anything. Yeah. It might get me fired.
Yeah.
And then what fight am I going to fight? So, there is no point to communication. I mean, that is a horrible thought.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't plan on staying there after this is resolved, but no. Yeah. I would like to, get an update from him, but I don't want to interact with him at all because I know what happened last time I asked for an update.
I think it was a really important point that you touched on, Dan, or at least it hit me a lot, maybe because I have that toddler at home. It's such a good point that I think takes so much time for many, many people. That's my judge. What do you call it?
Prejudice.
What do you call it? Yeah, prejudice. Maybe this is clear to everybody except me. But for me, it's been a long, hardest work to approach what you just said there. That when my child is frustrated and angry and screams, I get angry. And the reason I get angry with him is because I can't deal with my own sense of inefficiency, that his anger somehow reflects something about me that I can't deal with. So the temptation to try to shut him down is very real, But luckily enough, I can see this pattern already. I think a lot of older folks in previous generations maybe never got that far. I think it's a very nuanced matrix to be able to see and talk about these things, that somebody's anxiety raises my anxiety, but my anxiety is risen by the image that I get of myself in being unable to respond to his or her needs. And in that limbo, many a child and their parent have walked, I think. In that electrified tightrope, as Mike Agan writes about, there can be a whole life of miscommunication, misunderstanding, fights between a teenager and his dad. That's sad sometimes to think about, but it's really cool that this comes up, because I think it brings that consciousness. It brings that expanded mind that we spoke about, the possibility to see things from a third position, where it's like, no, I don't need to tell my son to shut up, because he has every right to be angry. He's 18 months old. I just need to keep working on dealing why this emerges in me, and what that has to do with my history, and how I can become better at holding that for myself and letting him be 18 months old and doing exactly what he's supposed to do: scream and throw up and yell and
You are both transforming in O.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
or failing to do so.
Yeah, but at least trying. So I think that was some kind of meta point that you touched on there, I think. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we've
All
gotten
right.
through the introduction to today's episode. Now we can dig in a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you say,
So what
gentlemen?
have we figured out? This is my part of the
Yeah.
show. Right? What have we figured out, guys? Let's take a round of maybe I can start then. I think what has stuck with me are these thoughts about the possibility of evolution in O, in a way that when trauma happens, it shatters our perception, but that also gives us a possibility, or not a possibility. There is a need, I think, because after trauma, one is in pain. So there is a need to update and, upsensitize the linguistical, symbolic, and imaginary filters so that the experience becomes coherent again. And that can entail finding new friends and new groups, but it doesn't have to. It could also be an internal work, I think. But it is a work, or at least that's my view of it, that there is a work of updating the senses. So for me, I almost got a visual image of that somehow, how the reel flows through like a river or like a field. And then we have these human orchestrated 3-second version, like we have language and we have images in our head and stuff. But they're very new in this. The body runs a lot of the show. So there is a certain kind of respect and depth that needs to come for one's own body and the wisdom that it holds. So I think those are some kind of, there is some kind of possibility of the symbolic bridge, like Dan spoke about also. Like there is a bridge of going from a happy place, trauma place, post-trauma place. That journey is possible, and it's worth striving for, I think.
And when the world messes with you, refuses to engage, what capacity do you have in yourself to tolerate it, to solve it in a way? I think the idea that transformation in O, that is something we are always challenged to do. As long as that is happening, we get better and better at taking these raw reactions and at least buying ourselves time and sometimes words. And the word transformation is important here. It's not just us who are transforming or we who are transforming. I think, what's the alternative to rage, to that helpless, rageful reaction, which we all know so well? Well, one thing is our ability to transform per se. It's one thing to be able to, find the perfect sentence to say to your asshole boss, so that the problem gets taken care of. But we also have good deeds. We have paying it forward. We have art, music, writing essays and even angry political screeds about how cruel and fucked up and arbitrary the world is. Make something. People say, yeah, you're gonna make something of it. Well, yeah, I'm gonna make something of it. I'm gonna write a poem.
Yes.
I'm gonna come up with a new salad dressing. Whatever it is that lets me take this raw stuff and not just be trapped in my own bile. It gives hope. It makes it possible to connect internally and intersubjectively, as you would say.
Yeah.
Joe, what are your
My
penny for your thoughts?
He deserves a raise.
well,
Nickel.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm feeling more so than our first two episodes. I'm feeling more like I'm walking away with more questions than answers, but I think that's fine too. And I think it's, I mean, like I said before, the sort of anger journey I've been on showed me that this is all an ongoing process, and non-linear in many many cases, process of becoming more aware, and not necessarily striving for perfection in your, in your perception and how you deal with the world, but at least an awareness of it. and
sometimes asking questions is a really profound art. It's also a sublimated, higher representational form of channeling certain emotions. Asking difficult and good questions is sometimes a key to continue the journey.
A question carries it forward.
Yeah, no, but think about the whole quantum idea, right? The question you ask is the answer you get. So perhaps it's not only a bad thing that you walk away today with more questions. Maybe there is some potential in that. Like, what are those questions? Think about them, ask them.
Right.
Use your voice. Because questions are powerful.
Yeah. So one last thing in the vein of creating art to deal with ourselves, I am putting something in the chat. This is a video that I just put out. It's about the politics of Star Trek, which is
I knew it was going to come back to you.
All right.
Just mostly what I talk about in life.
All right.
Oh yeah. We talked about the inner light last time. Which one is this?
This one is more general. It's about the there's an ongoing debate on the left about whether about whether the Federation is socialist or just approaching socialist or not even close.
People love to use that word, don't they?
Socialist?
Those who accuse us of becoming socialist, I find, are the least likely to know what the hell the word means.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it is a debate among people who, some of them think it would be good if it was socialist, and some don't.
I see the Ferengi as representatives of the free market.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yeah. Actually my previous video on this channel was about the inner light. So there's that too. At some point I might talk about a different pop culture franchise, but we'll see.
Is this yours, actually? The Radicalize Me?
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Yeah, so Radicalize Me is my podcast, and I, expanded it to YouTube. The podcast is more me interviewing people.
So let's pump this to all the figuring out as we go along, listeners, that you all go and peep Joe's podcast on
and Joe,
Radicalize Me.
When you edit this, you got to put your link in there, right?
Yeah.
Market it, baby. And this also challenges us, Martin, to come up with a better name.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Cool.
All right.
Heck yeah.
So, yeah, is that about it?
It better be.
The psychic potential to become better at confronting the real and dealing with situations in new ways. It's an ongoing learning experience.
Yeah.
Reel me in.
Hey, that's gonna be the last, I think.
Reel it in, reel me in.
Reel it in. Keep it real.
Yeah, I
reel
like
it
that.
in. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So should we call it that?
Let's call it that. We are now going to we're calling it reel it in with an REAL.
Yeah.
Or reel me in.
Yeah, I like it.
It or me.
Cool.
Oh, I think it. Make it closer to the phrase itself. Yeah.
All right. Cool. We have a name. Guys, have a great week. Everybody else, have a great week.
See ya.
Bye.
Take care.